Hello, today I will be doing my Module 2 reflection over the Social Skills Training webinar. The first question I'm going to go over is, what did I learn from the webinar? The webinar gave a lot of really good information on how to implement social skills training with students with autism. As I learned in my classroom, every single student with autism has different social skills, abilities, and strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's super important to target those individual skills. So I learned a lot about that in the webinar. The first thing I learned is that hope leads to a better outcome. It's super important not only for the teachers to show and implement the idea of hope and that the students can succeed and that they can overcome those challenges that they have with social skills, but it's also to implement that in the house. And parents who also have hope will help have a better, more positive outcome for those students, rather than those that say, oh, he's never gonna learn social skills, so we're just gonna do what we can do. So it's super important to implement hope both in the classroom and at home, to have a better outcome for those students that do struggle with social skills. The second thing I learned is deciding what to teach, prioritizing what is relevant to the individual student's needs and the setting that we have available. Like I said, every single student with autism is different. Every single student with autism has different strengths and weaknesses when related to social skills and communication, and implementing those in the classroom. So I think it's super important to, number one, figure out what that individual student's strengths are and help build upon those, rather than try and correcting their weaknesses. So taking into consideration what their strengths are and then implementing those weaknesses into those strengths in order to help build on their social skills. The other thing I learned is how important it is to identify triggers, to understand what triggers relate to outbursts or relate to those inverted actions, and what those triggers are that make a student unable to socially communicate with their peers. So I think it's super important to identify those triggers, and that's something that I haven't put a big emphasis on in my classroom. I also learned that parent-teacher surveys are a huge help, to then in turn turn them into observations that will identify those key triggers and then help us decide back to identifying what to teach. Another thing that I learned is that motivation is key, making rewards, making sure that the student understands, if you do this, then you can do this. And implementing those rewards, and making it an enjoyable experience, such as drawing or something that they really like to do, or something that they're interested in at the time. I know I have a student with autism that his interests change a lot. At one point in time, he was super interested in space and being an astronaut and going to space. So we just implemented those social skill trainings onto what he liked. So we said, go and start a conversation with so-and-so about going to space and what you want to do when you get to space. So then in turn, he went and he asked the student, what's your favorite planet? And then that turned into a conversation. He explained his favorite planet and why he wants to be an astronaut and things like that. And then when his interests changed, like right now, he's really into dinosaurs and T-Rexes. So now we're turning those conversations to revolve around dinosaurs. And I have a dinosaur puzzle in my classroom. So I said, go ask so-and-so if he wants to do a dinosaur puzzle with you, just to get that social interaction. And then it's something that he's interested in at the time. So it's helping. So I learned that those things that I'm already doing are something positive, and now I can turn those into social skills training activities, rather than just something that we did in the classroom for free time or earned time at the end of the day. Another thing I learned, I'm going to reiterate this a lot, is building on the student's strengths and not just correcting their weaknesses. Super important to identify their strengths and then not just focus on what they're weak in, but also reward them and explain to them how strong they are in some other points. And then the last thing that I really learned about was the matching the skills to a proper language skill. So matching something that they're super good at right now and then turning that into a language skill. Like I said, something like the dinosaur puzzles, say, okay, you really like dinosaurs and you want to do this puzzle, go ask someone to help you with it, or go ask someone if they're interested in doing the puzzle with you. Turning those skills that they like to do into communicating with their peers. The next thing I'm going to talk about is how I will use this in my educational practice. So number one, I'm going to start implementing those parent and those teacher surveys about the problem area or the social skill that we need to target. So I'm going to send those out to my regular ed teachers as well as the parents, and then cross-reference them with my survey. I will also do one to decide what target skill we need to target first, and then so on and so forth. So what everyone's input is in together, so we can decide what skill really needs to be addressed. Another thing that I will put into practice in my classroom is identifying those triggers. So once I get those surveys back, I really want to do multiple observations to see, what is leading up to the undesired behavior? What happens afterwards? What can we do to avoid the trigger to happen so that maybe the social skills training will be less rigorous, and we will understand, if this happens, we know that if this happens, this behavior is going to happen. So I really want to do those observation and identify those triggers. The next thing that I'm going to implement in my practice is evaluations, taking out a checklist to the playground or into the classroom or in the social skills setting, just to see and progress monitor how our training is doing towards correcting those target skills that we want to target. So the next thing I want to discuss is what topic presented in the video had the most impact on me personally. There was a few. The number one was identifying triggers. That's something that I haven't been good at in the past. I haven't really thought about the triggers until he expressed how important it is to understand those triggers. So that's something that really impacted me and made me think, I need to identify those triggers for all my students. The second thing was implementing the evaluation cards and progress monitoring. That's something that I've struggled with a lot of things, just IEPs in general, is that progress monitoring and having a concrete, in front of my face progress monitoring system. So I think the checklists on the playground, or those checklists and observations, are really going to help me to develop maybe a spreadsheet on the computer and then print it out and have it on hand all the time. So, if he is doing the actions like asking a student if he wants to do the puzzle with him, then I can check that off, he did that. And having those concrete in front of me all the time so that I can progress monitor throughout the day, not just when I sit down at the computer. Just having this on a clipboard in my classroom, and whenever I observe it, go check it off and help me progress monitoring better. The next thing is use of better visual support for these students that have communication needs. Using the app that he talked about, the app Visual Scheduler, I really want to try that so that not only, I walk around with an iPad or my phone or whatever all the time at school. So maybe using that app on one of the classroom iPads, and each student has their visual schedule on their iPad and they can take it with them. Having visuals in the classroom, I already do that, but I think it's super important to implement that in every classroom. And then also having those visuals printed out and in each student has a binder, a data binder. So maybe having that in their data binder to reference throughout the day might help, but implementing more of those visuals. And then just having visuals in the classroom to help students communicate their needs or what they want. I really need to get better at that. So I'm going to start researching and looking at more visuals to help with communication in the classroom. I also know that my speech therapist is really good about that. So maybe partnering with him, and then we can use some of the same visuals so that they're not confused, throughout everybody and all the people on the IEP team. The next thing is I really, really like the pivotal response training. So rather than, telling my student, hey, we're going to sit down and we're going to do this, and then you're going to get this in return. Sometimes, outbursts happen and they don't want to sit there and do something like that. So I have a student that loves to draw. So that example he gave about his daughter drawing and then asking the questions about the color and the shape and all of that, I think that I can really implement that in my classroom with my student who loves to draw, and he's always asking, Miss Dallas, can I have a piece of paper so I can draw? Can I have a piece of tape so I can do this? So I think implementing those pivotal response trainings and asking him questions while he's drawing, rather than letting the drawing be a reward time, but maybe that being our skill target time, and implementing something that he really likes, and then asking those questions throughout that while he's drawing can really help. So I'm super excited to implement that. I'm going to start that on Thursday whenever I see my students in person. Really excited just to see how maybe letting him draw rather than saying let's do this and then you can draw, seeing if that changes his attitude and changes his behaviors and decreases those outbursts in the classroom. So I really enjoyed this webinar because it was something that that addressed the challenges that I'm currently having in my classroom, and the challenges that I have with all the autistic students, and how I can implement things that I'm already doing but in a more productive and responsive manner. So I'm super excited to try these and glad that I got the opportunity to watch this webinar. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed all the things that I learned.